Hello again, food enthusiasts. My name is Chris Rechkowski, your host today for the FutureFoodCast, where we talk with thought leaders in today's food industry and discuss the trends and technology that will shape the future of food. Today, we're speaking with David Kroll, CEO of Egglife Foods. Very happy to have you with us today, David. Really interesting product and company. Welcome to the program.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Chris.
Excellent. Well, we like to get started on these podcasts with learning a little bit more about our guest. And maybe could you give us a bit of an introduction of where you came from before Egglife, what you were doing, and what motivated you to kind of take the jump into the CEO position?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting journey for me, right? Because I spent 30 years climbing the marketing CPG ladder, and found myself most recently as the chief marketing officer for Miller Coors, so in the alcoholic beverage industry, which was a great run. But I had reached a point in my career that I actually wanted to do a little bit good for the world, right? So not to bash on alcoholic drinks, but they're not exactly great for you. And I live in Chicago, and Chicago has become a hotbed of innovation as it relates to food and beverage, and in particular, better for you food and beverage. So I'm sitting in the backyard watching literally the transformation of food happening around me, and I made a very conscious decision that I wanted to participate in that, right? So I initially left Miller Coors to head up a small company called Cocoa 5, but then was introduced to Egglife, and literally the brakes hit, and I've never seen a brand or a product or a story like Egglife, right? And so it fascinated me, and a coffee led to more discussions, and it led to me coming over to Egglife to help bring it to life.
Well, certainly a highly qualified expert in the food and beverage area, with decades of experience in all aspects of that. And really interesting that you have made this jump based on your personal interests in health, sustainability of food supply chains, and what that can mean to consumers. And before we start, and maybe this is even a segue into the product, in our earlier discussion, we talked about the founder and inventor of Egglife, and I think maybe if you can kind of give an introduction to Peggy Johns and how this all developed, it really sets a nice foundation for talking about Egglife.
Yeah, no, I've always been fascinated by brands that were rooted in a true story, right? And Peggy Johns is a 40-year veteran of the egg industry, working for Roseacre Farms. She's also a savant in the kitchen, and unfortunately found herself being diagnosed with a series of health challenges. And so she literally took it upon herself to change her lifestyle, and spent the better part of 2 years and probably a few thousand recipes in her kitchen, matching her two passion points between eggs and cooking, and found a way to replace wheat flour in pretty much anything, right? So proprietary protected process that can span pretty much any category, right? So Egglife, we've initially introduced it through the egg white wraps, but you'll see that as being literally just the first chapter of a very long novel about how Egglife will continue to disrupt and replace wheat flour across many, many different categories.
Another great, I think, foundation for a company that we like to feature in this podcast, which is all about sustainability and health and technology trends. And we haven't even gotten to the technology side yet. And I know you've got a good story to tell there as well. But really, Peggy leveraging her expertise and working in also a company that Roseacres that focuses on sustainable egg production, and bringing this product out. But as you said, it's a new product. And maybe for our listeners, so that we all understand what we're talking about, is somewhat of a replacement for wheat. And as you mentioned, the first products are the wraps, which are, if you will, I think somewhat of a replacement for tortillas or this type of bread product. But can you tell us a little bit more about Egglife, the products, so that we know what we're getting into here, and maybe a glimpse of where you see it going in 2022?
Yeah, for sure. So, Egglife, it is founded on what we call going against the grain, right? So we are disrupting and replacing wheat flour. Our initial product line is the egg white wraps, and it is very much what you described, right? So the logical replacement is for tortillas, but the versatility of what we bring to market actually transcends tortillas, right? So Most retailers liken it to an entirely new category and changing the way people eat, right? But if you look at our product, we span 5 flavors, right? So we're bringing flavor innovation to, a bread-like category that hasn't existed before. So you find us obviously with our original, but also flavors including Southwest, Italian, rye, everything bagel. And we're about to introduce another new flavor, which I can't talk about right now, but that'll be coming out shortly next year. So, but importantly, it's a product that has a very clean label, as you'd expect, predominantly made with eggs, but just a handful of other ingredients that are all natural. And then our macros are game changing, right? So a product that's got fewer than 30 calories, roughly 5 grams of protein, no carbs, and no saturated fat. And so, you match that up with, the rise in keto, paleo, and people's desire to eat healthier without all the traditional trade-offs that you have to take with taste or artificial sweeteners and the like. And it's been a home run, right? And so we've been sprinting since we introduced it basically in January of 2020, right? And so we started with a couple hundred stores in the Chicagoland area, and we'll finish this year just under 10,000 doors.
That's amazing growth, and congratulations on that. They certainly found a great CEO to help achieve that.
Oh, you're too kind.
One of the things that we often talk about on this program, always talk about, is technology, but it tends to be on supply chain, e-commerce, that type of thing, which we'll get to. But your product also has a really interesting story on the technology development side and the technology implementation side. And I understand it's very proprietary and we're not going to dive into the details, but I think, it's good for our audience to see and hear maybe as much as you can tell us about the real scientific work that went into producing this natural product and not into producing the next load of chemicals that has glossy wrapping around it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I mentioned what attracted me, which is obviously Peggy's story. You got a product that trumps pretty much anything that's remotely similar in the marketplace. The fact that we are backed by a very strong supply chain with Rose Acres. But importantly, as you mentioned, so there's the technology and the IP associated with what we do, which gets into the very discrete chemistry of what actually is an egg. And, there is no probably stronger or more pure fundamental food than the egg. And we've been very purposeful on surrounding our business with best-in-class researchers and R&D experts as it relates to egg, right? And so we've got some folks in-house that I would say are probably easily in the top 5 within egg expertise across the world, and understanding how those proteins react to cooking and how you can work with those proteins to deliver the same benefits that you would traditionally get from gluten-based products, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's about as far as I can get into the technology of the how and why it works, because it's pretty fascinating, but that's where the IP lies, right? So it is very unusual to have in food and beverage, because there are a lot of copycats happening in food and beverage innovation, right? But very few that actually have proven IP that's protectable and sustainable. And we've got that protected now across the world.
And that's a great point. I hope it's something that other entrepreneurs also pick up on, and seeing the potential for real technology innovation in the production process. Everybody's got their secret recipes, etc. But so much knowledge has gone into food science, maybe in ways that now we're trying to get away from, but there's no reason that knowledge can't be used for good, if you will, instead of just pushing more chemicals.
Yeah, and I think it's super interesting, right? Because I think what you've seen is consumers wake up to the fact that a lot of what they're eating is incredibly artificial or chemically treated, right? And so I think from a lot of the big company standpoint, that R&D, like over the past 30 years, has mainly been focused on chemical innovation, right? So how do you produce things quicker, faster, more efficiently, without honestly the sight lines to how it actually affects people from a nutrition standpoint, right? And so I think people are definitely waking up to that, and I think you're seeing that happen across the entire rise of keto, paleo, and the like.
Mm-hmm. And you used a term that we've seen several times in this podcast of clean label. I think this is definitely an industry insider term. At this point, it hasn't quite gotten out there like functional foods, these types of things. But an interesting kind of point that comes along with this. In speaking with another company that is essentially a food design house, when they would look at shelf life extension, is like, well, dump chemical X in it or chemical Y, and that's how we do it. But they're being mandated now, I would say, which sounds a bit similar to the products you've developed, to say, well, yes, we want the shelf life, but can't we get something natural to do that? And they're looking at mushrooms and other things, that those natural substances. And here again is the science that Egglife is definitely a very good leader in that area.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. Well, with all of this hard work that goes into the design and the production of the product, and sticking with the focus on real good quality sustainable food raw materials, let's talk a bit about the supply chain. Of course, mostly it's eggs, but how is this, the quality of the supply chain, the sustainability of the supply chain, reflected internally with Egglife? And then what are your consumers, your customers, asking you about that aspect of the product?
Yeah, it's interesting because we are so easily understood, we actually don't get a lot of questions around it. Because if you flip our pack over, as I mentioned, you literally have basically 5 or 6 ingredients, right? The 6 would be the natural spices that we use in some of our variants, like Italian. From a supply chain standpoint, as you mentioned, right? So we use cage-free eggs from Roseacre Farms, and we proudly put that at the very top of our product, right? And that sustainability component of our product is important to us. The humane treatment animals is important to us, and we don't yet, and I think we'll probably get to a question around blockchain. We don't yet get to blockchain and how that transcends all the way through. I mean, for us, it's pretty simple today because we do have just a handful of suppliers, but as we advance forward and as we go into more and more categories, you'll see us embrace as much as possible transparency across everything we do, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's part of the purpose-driven piece, and it also goes back to what Peggy's all about, right? So she's very proud of what we've done and the integrity of the product and what she's produced. She wants to make sure we're retaining that through everything we do. And so even if things may cost us a little bit more along the way from a spice standpoint, we want to make sure that the sourcing of those matches up with the principles of us at Egglife.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you said, the raw materials for your product are pretty well controlled because they're very focused, and actually comes out of the expertise of the partner company of Roseacres. But that also makes it easier probably to implement some of these tools and technology that provide transparency at the right time, because this is definitely something that we hear a lot about on this podcast, both from entrepreneurs, business leaders that are saying that what their customers want, and there's a bit of a struggle right now with how do we give that to them. There's the normal marketing approach to that, but that authenticity, I think, that flows through your product, from Peggy creating it to the ethos of the organization. This is what I see a lot of organizations trying to, how do we wrap a message around that? How do we deliver that message in a way that's authentic and people believe it, that there's trust in that? And there's the fancy words of blockchain and that type of thing eventually come into play. And there's some legitimacy there, but it sounds like that's a 2022, 23 type of activity for you.
I mean, it is, right? I mean, we're only, barely 2 years young. And so I think we'll be embracing a lot more of that technology as we go forward.
Well, then let's flip to the other side of this and think about it from the consumer point of view, and what you're doing today to reach consumers. One of the major earthquakes, if you will, in the food space over the last couple of years, of course, has been driven by the pandemic. It's been a huge shift of people willing to purchase food products online through e-commerce. How has this impacted what Egglife is producing in terms of how you look at channels to market through e-commerce, bricks and mortar?
Yeah, no, for sure. I actually think the pandemic has been a bit fascinating about how it's accelerated what would have been a natural change within the food channel and grocery in particular, right? And so, obviously, because of COVID, you had a lot more people purchasing across DTC. We're roughly transacting about 15% of our business right now direct to consumer, which honestly was a bit of a surprise to me, given that we're a refrigerated product, so we have to ship refrigerated, which isn't inexpensive. But you're finding that consumers are a bit inelastic because they want to be mindful of what they're putting in their bodies and how it's affecting them nutritionally. And I also think you got quite a bit of tailwind from the pandemic of people waking up to the importance of wellness, right? But I think all that was already, it was emerging even before the pandemic came about, right? So if I look at, and one of the things I monitor pretty heavily is, and been really interested in, is this massive rise in food tribes, right? So, the number of people involved in keto, paleo, Whole30, Weight Watchers, that list goes on and on. It's almost tripled, if not quadrupled, over the past 10 years about people participating in that. And there's a common thread that weaves through that, which is people are now truly connecting wellness with what they eat, right? And I think this is the undercurrent that is transforming the future of food. It's also, I think, heavily what's attracted people to Egglife so strongly, right? Because we fit each of those lifestyles. We're not a keto product per se, right? But we fit into that lifestyle. And as we connect with consumers, obviously from a marketing standpoint, we build communities. You'll see that on our sites. So we build communities and foster that dialogue amongst these food tribes, and then encourage them to share how they're using our product. And it's pretty fascinating the amount of user-generated content we get around the versatility of Egglife and how they're using that throughout their day, from breakfast occasions, dessert occasions, obviously lunch and dinner occasions, and then sharing those recipes with folks, right? And how they're using it from everything from making pizzas to dessert wraps and traditional tortilla preparations. So again, it's that sort of groundswell of interest in people discovering what they do view as a fairly new product, that they don't have to make any trade-offs from a taste or nutrition standpoint to adopt.
You mentioned something in terms of building communities. You're essentially building digital communities out there. And this is another point of resonance we see in the food space. And as the world becoming more decentralized in terms of IT infrastructure, if you will, in terms of communities, although you still, of course, there's Facebook and all these other things, but we definitely see a movement toward decentralization and the trust being brought about by, for example, a community that develops around Egglife. They have a particular interest in a product, and as you said, trading recipes, trading experiences, and there's trust built up in that. I'm curious, how did you start that community? Where do you feel that community exists? What are the key media channels, platforms that you use to maintain that community?
Yeah, I wish I could actually take credit for starting those communities, because they actually started organically. Is one of the things that I think we realized early on, that we were truly onto something, because we started in the Chicagoland area, and again, that groundswell that just grew immediately about people discovering us, right? So there's a lot of self-discovery. So rather than us pushing the community, we sort of just gave a voice to the communities, right? And we tried to do that through, our own site in some respects, but we're across all the traditional social media sites, and we're now dabbling a little bit in TikTok here and there, right? So, experimenting across the board. But, things like Pinterest, like our product is beautiful when it's in preparation, right? And so, photography and food has also been a fascinating trend, which I frankly don't completely understand. But the people are matching up the two and, really focusing on the creation aspect that Egglife has enabled them, right? And people like, I never thought I could use a quote unquote tortilla this way, and then sharing with folks, and then you get immediate response and viral nature of people sharing that, right? So, which is everything that you expect from social media these days, right? So, we couple that with, we are doing a lot of work with registered dietitians right now, so getting trusted voices behind the brand, so third-party voices that are largely unpaid, that we will also just give a voice to, right? So we're doing quite a bit with those folks. Some of that happening obviously on YouTube and the like, and you'll see us do more of that in the future.
Yeah, I guess part of my interest in this product also, I maybe similar to Peggy, I have a family member that has one of these dietary restriction issues, which leads to pretty severe health risks if you don't manage your diet properly, cutting out wheat and many, many other things. I've noticed that a factor of that is a tremendous interest in where food comes from, believing that it's really organic or really from this place or really doesn't have just a little bit of that in it, but it's below a threshold of reporting type of thing, which kind of brings me to a thought on traceability and raw material traceability. And even though you have a pretty small, if you will, bill of materials on your product, how does food traceability play into the importance of your product? And how might you see that wrapping back to transparency and sort of these fancy technologies that will be rolling out in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, I think transparency is absolutely critical to basically any product, but importantly, better for you products. Because the people that are turning your pack over and engaging with your nutrition label and your ingredient label are for, whether it's for medical purposes or for diet purposes, it's truly important to them and critical to them that they understand what's in these products and that there's not any smoke and mirrors, right? So Egglife is fully embracing transparency, and I think I mentioned earlier, like we'll continue to do so, whether that's through technology or just communication through all of our own channels. But we are very purposeful on really dissecting each of our suppliers to understand the same story. We are very particular in understanding how, for instance, the spices were sourced and farmed, as an example, right? And so we want to make sure that we are bulletproof and protective of our consumers to make sure that they know exactly what they're putting in their bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you noted before, there are some things that are developing out there that are maybe in the near future for Egglife, but certainly as we see more products coming out that are leveraging sort of these trusted references, the blockchain solutions, that type of thing, it sounds like it'll drop neatly into what you're already doing.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on the right word, because it is all about trust. And the world is still, this is the importance of brands, right? So you build a relationship with your consumers that is based on trust, and you can't break that trust, right? And and in the better for you space, and as we continue to disrupt legacy wheat-based categories, we want to make sure that people have trust in us to be doing it the right way. And I think Egglife is very much doing it the right way today.
As we look forward and we perceive this transparency becoming easier for companies to implement, easier for consumers to look through a product and interact even with the suppliers in some cases, what do you see that doing to the overall, I would say, the traditional food sector? Transparency is not necessarily at the top of the list of a lot of companies out there. And sometimes that's for good reasons, because there's some proprietary stuff around what they do. But sometimes it's just like, I don't really want the consumers to know what's in my product. What, you've played leading roles in major corporations, global corporations of all types. How do you see that as it gets traction impacting companies that maybe don't want to be as transparent?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're going to have a choice, to be honest, right? Because consumers will vote with their wallets, and as people get caught out on using highly artificial or highly processed ingredients, I think consumers will eventually walk away. And I think you're starting to see that, and I think it's one of the interesting cascade effects that we're going to see, which is already happening, is all the growth that's happening in traditional grocery is basically happening in the perimeter in the refrigerated section, right? So we're refrigerated. That's where you'll find us. It's not in the center store where you find a lot of the legacy-based, wheat-based products, right? And part of the reason you can live in the center store is because you're chock full of stuff that makes sure that you don't expire anytime soon. And as I got to be more involved in food, I got more aware of flipping products over and looking to see what the ingredients were. And it's honestly a bit horrifying at times to see what's in a loaf of bread that makes it last for 45, 60, 100, 120 days, right? That just shouldn't happen, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, again, people are waking up to that fact, and you've seen it happen across categories where the better for you products are largely in the refrigerated set, and they're completely debunking their legacy counterparts.
It sounds like you might foresee a future where there could be more refrigerated products, shorter shelf lives, essentially requiring more efficient distribution systems, more efficient upcycling of foods. I've heard that from a number of companies of, even when if there is more food waste, finding a way to get it used, if you will, in some other creative way more quickly.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a ton of innovation happening in that supply chain, and how do you just shorten the chain, right, from farmer's field to the consumer's pantry. This is where DTC is going to have a huge role to play, right? So how do you actually just circumvent the store? And I think you're also going to see a huge rise in, how does refrigerated DTC happen, right? And I think there's going to be quite a bit of innovation happening in that respect.
Interesting. So for, I guess everybody's understanding, DTC is probably direct to customer. When do you see that being possible? Because frankly, I'd buy just about everything I could online, other than, for fun, I want to go to the food store and just browse around sometimes. But as you said, it's other than getting a meal delivered that's hot or cold, there really aren't options at the moment. What might you foresee in terms of when am I going to be able to get your product delivered chilled, or a carton of milk delivered chilled?
Well, you already can, right? So, I mentioned Chicago is sort of a hotbed of innovation. Mm-hmm. We're not alone on this, but Amazon Fresh is disrupting a ton of what's happening in the marketplace. If I went on Amazon Fresh right now and ordered 4 or 5 packs of Egglife, they'd be on my doorstep literally within 2 hours, right? In a refrigerated bag, right? With constant notifications of when they're arriving. And so I think you're going to see, again, the co-location of distribution centers kind of replacing a lot of traditional grocery. And people are going to basically almost have the availability for produce, refrigerated, and fill in the blank, almost real time for what they want at their homes. Now, if you're in rural areas, it's going to be a little bit more challenging, right? So that'll probably be one of the later areas to advance on that, but I think you're going to see major metros make that move very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think I'm based in Canada, and some of these advances take a little bit more time to work their way north through the snow and ice occasionally. Yeah, I've definitely experienced that when I'm in the US, in Austin or something like that. Tremendously fast process of getting just about anything you want from a food store.
Yeah, unbelievably fast. And some of my early experience with this is the quality is actually even fresher, right? And so everything from basil to avocados, like the things that you can get quickly to your doorstep that can honestly be a bit frustrating at times if you pick them up at the grocery, because they generally don't last that long. I think products like that, products like Egglife, right, that people want ready access to, like that's going to become table stakes for folks in the not too distant future.
Yeah, well, again, a tremendous growth and innovation story for Egglife, all the way from the origin story to the science, the proprietary science behind it, and that science still producing a natural, healthy product, not filled with chemicals that we can't pronounce, all the way to your sort of delivery capabilities to customers. Really an amazing product. What should we look for in excitement from Egglife over the next 2 to 3 years, not only in products, and I know a lot of that is proprietary, but just sort of the nature of where you're growing and maybe the geographies that you expect to be serving?
Yeah, I mean, we fully expect Egglife to become a household name, right? You will see us not transcend traditional grocery, right? So if you look across, food service, QSR, I think we will be a backbone to help some of those partners accelerate their growth in their business, because they're also challenged with needing to provide better for you options for their customers, right? So you'll see us become omni-channel, which is a bit of a cliched word for being universally available, right? So you'll see us pretty much everywhere, and probably in some different formats and flavors, right? So you'll see us innovate within the wrap space. As I mentioned, we have our IP protected around the world, right? And so, we're already in Puerto Rico, which we're learning a lot about how Latino consumers adopt an egg white wrap to replace their traditional tortilla. So, LATAM would not be out of the question for us within the next few years. Canada, where you are right now, we're making a lot of progress on bringing about distribution in Canada, and I think the story will just continue to cascade from there. And then I won't get into specifics, but it doesn't take rocket scientists to figure out what other legacy flour-based categories that are out there are ready for disruption, right? And we'll be ready for it within the next few years.
Excellent. Well, it's really great to see this innovation happening on a large scale quickly. It's really hard to scale and satisfy even a small portion of the United States. And you've done an amazing job, like you said, in 2 years to be in, I think you said 10,000 different locations across North America. Really appreciate you being on the program today, David. Egglife's a great product. I'm definitely going to be trying it, and hopefully my family will be trying it also with that one situation where I said they have a restricted diet. It would be a game changer for them because I know they basically don't eat bread anymore.
Yeah. Well, we would be perfect for that diet, right? So just let me know an address and we can get you some packages shipped Excellent. Up straight away.
Well, thanks again, David. Great to have you, and looking forward to maybe having you again next year as we see some more products rolling out.
Yep, we're happy to do it and really enjoyed the time.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for listening to FutureFoodCast. FutureFoodCast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.